All right, we are live in three, two, one. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Chiefs fans, depending on what time you are listening to this podcast. I am Jason Seibel, your host of Chiefs Central Radio on ProFootballCentral.com, the only place for sports podcasts, and this is your official Chiefs podcast, Chiefs Central Radio, doing episode 1 here with me. As always, and as will be always, my co-host, my good friend, Chris Kilduff. How you doing, Chris?
Pretty good, man. The weather down here is killing us, though. You probably have that nice Texas weather going on, huh?
I do. Being down here in San Antonio, Texas, both Chris and I, and we'll get into who we are and where we come from and what brings us to the Chiefs here in a minute, but both displaced Chiefs fans. I live in San Antonio, Texas. Chris is up in the great Northwest in Spokane, Washington. So what's the weather going on up there? What do you got going on?
Well, it's just crazy. You remember Spokane weather. It'll be 81 day, and then these last 3 days, man, wasn't above 57 today.
Yeah, well, weather's going crazy all across. You got the Midwest, the tornadoes in Nebraska, and obviously thoughts go out to those folks. But down here it's a balmy 95 and about 95% humidity. So definitely dealing with that. Chiefs fans, fans of football, will as we take this journey here on Chiefs Central Radio, you'll get to hear from Chris and I every week as we recap Chiefs going-ons, what's going on with OTAs, what's going on with training camps, and then as we get into the season, obviously, what's going on during the season. We got a lot to talk about, but first I'm going to kind of give Chris the stage here, and Chris, kind of introduce yourself to our listeners, let them know who you are and what we're all about.
Yeah, I started just a supreme football fan. I kind of grew up in it. I kind of was raised by a single father, and he was a football fan. He grew up with Boomer Esiason. So I don't know if you knew that tidbit from last time we talked, but he grew up. He was good childhood friends with Boomer Esiason. Boomer apparently was like a hardcore baseball player when he was younger. So my dad played a lot of really high level baseball for a while, and so they grew up together. So my dad was like, once Boomer grew up and ended up being famous, my dad followed him and was a Bengals fan for a long time, and but he's from New York too, so he was a Jets fan and stuff like that. So I kind of got into it from all that, and from one reason or another, I mean, this is like 8-year-old me, like I just kind of always hooked onto the Chiefs. Like I was always a big fan of defense. And then in that time period, the Chiefs really had just kind of that really high-end defense. And I also fell in love with Christian Okoye, who was like the huge back then. Like everyone else was these tiny little running backs, and he was just this huge freight train of a guy, and I kind of really liked him. So kind of started early, and I never really got rid of it. Always been a diehard Chiefs fan.
Yeah, I never knew that your dad was friends with Boomer Esiason. That's crazy. Yeah. Chris and I have been friends for a long time, and actually did another podcast last year for a different network. But never knew that. That's very interesting. And we'll learn probably much more about each other as we move through this. But my journey to the Chiefs was a little bit different than yours. Growing up, I was raised by a single mother, but also a diehard football fan. But she was a fan of the San Francisco 49ers, and like I think a lot of modern day Chiefs fans, I came to the Chiefs when in '93 when the epic trade of Joe Montana. Yep, I moved to the Chiefs with Joe. I was a 49ers fan as a little kid. In fact, here's a little let's bring it all together here. The first game that I really remember watching was the Super Bowl against the Bengals when Joe drove them down the field, the 49ers down the field, and scored the winning touchdown to John Taylor in the back of the end zone to win that game.
I remember that one too, big time.
I bet with your dad being friends with Boomer, I bet you do. Yeah. That's really my first football memory, and I loved Joe and loved what he was all about. And so, by the time '93 rolled around, I was 16, 17, and really kind of old enough to make my own decision about what football team I liked. And he went to the Chiefs, and I obviously at that age, didn't really understand the business aspect of football, and was so disgusted with the 49ers that they would do that. I said, well, I'm going to be a Chiefs fan, and I've been a Chiefs fan ever since. So through the good the little bit of good and the bad.
There was good? What did I miss?
Oh, we had good. I mean, the 93-94 seasons were good, and then of course 2003, and yeah, I mean last year.
I know, right? Yeah, they're few and far between, but yeah, it was always so funny that we ended up meeting because, like, literally, I think we're the only two people in Spokane who were Chiefs fans. Like, it was so weird.
Yeah.
Like, I was friends with your wife at work, and then when she ended up, getting together with you, and she's like, "Oh yeah, he's a Chiefs fan." I was like, "What? Like, I've never even heard of." Like, I thought I was the only one in the area. So
yeah, it's cool. So anyway, listeners, as we go on here, yeah, Chris and I have been friends for a long time, and kind of been through this up and down with the Chiefs. So we've got kind of a format that we're going to try to stick to with this show. Sometimes we might stray, especially if we bring in a guest or two, and that's definitely in the mix for this season. Here on Chief Central Radio under the Pro Football Central network, is that one of the things that we would like to try to do is bring in some guests. In addition to doing this podcast, I also write for Bleacher Report as well as cover 32 Chiefs. So you can find my stuff at both of those sites as far as the written word goes. But in those travels, I've managed to make some contacts and get to know some folks that I could potentially bring on the show. Different voice, different opinion, if you will. So that's kind of some stuff that we'd like to do with this show as we move through this 2014 season. But before we get too far into 2014,
you generally catch me bitching on Facebook. That's about as far.
Yeah, Chris doesn't tweet. He doesn't Twitter. He doesn't do any of that stuff. He doesn't write. Well, he writes, but not football stuff, and not
anything anyone can read.
Yeah, exactly. It's usually the ramblings from the voices in his head. So, but yeah, he does a lot of bitching on Facebook. That's about it. But don't we all? Don't we all when it comes to the Chiefs? So, but yeah, before we get too far into 2014, Chris, I think it's probably appropriate to kind of just take a kind of a quick look back at our take on this epic 2013 season that was, and kind of start this version of our new show here on Chief Central Radio, from that point. So I'll pass it over to you and kind of get what are your thoughts, summed up to 140 characters or less on the 2013 season.
Yeah, I'm not used to that 140 characters. No, but they man, one thing you can say is just wild ride. Like, I don't know. It's really hard for me to put that season in perspective because it's so different than of course, I could be biased for being a Chiefs fan or whatever, but that is the weirdest season of football I've ever watched in my life. Like, first of all, I didn't expect us, obviously, to go 9-0, and then, we're so blown away by how well we're performing, but our offense was really kind of underwhelming, and our defense was just over the top, and then we had the bye week, and, I don't know if the poles on Earth switched or what happened, but it was just the craziest thing ever to see the defense super struggle, and then we had one of the top three offenses in the league for the second half after our bye week there. So it's really hard for me to put in perspective what's what when we had such a weird polar opposite season going on.
Yeah, it was definitely the tale of two halves, with last season in regards to, like you said, the defense was, people were making comparisons to the '85 Bears, in the first half of last season, and it's like, now you look back and you take the season as a whole and you think, what the hell were they thinking? And just the way that they collapsed, really kind of starting with that, the Cleveland game. And then into the Bills game week 9, and then of course coming out of the bye and the two Broncos games and the Chargers game, and so yeah, it was and it's funny because really, and you and I have talked about this at great length, and I've written about it, I've talked to other Chiefs fans about it. That there's really no good reason that it happened, other than coaches started figuring it out, I guess. I mean, I don't know. What do you think?
There were some injuries in there, we definitely, losing Justin Houston and Tom Bahali, we had some defensive injuries. I don't think Brandon Flowers was ever super healed throughout the year. So, I mean, I think we definitely did have some injuries that caught up with us, but I definitely don't think that was like the reason. And as much as you can talk about the weirdness of the defense, it was also the exact. It would have been one thing if the defense just fell apart and then we became this like horrible football team. But for one reason or another, yet to be known, the offense started just putting up crazy numbers. It's like Alex Smith found his footing and was throwing. I mean, he must have thrown 5 times the yardage. I haven't done the math, but in those last 5 or 6 games than he did the entire season. It was crazy.
Yeah, I mean his offensive production, yeah, for sure. I mean towards the end of the season, offensive production definitely through the roof as that defense declined. Um, but in regards to that season, let's kind of break it down like this. What was your high point? What was your absolute high point, best point from last season that you can remember?
Man, tell you the truth, like as much, I mean, going 9-0 and just that streak and to keep building every game was just phenomenal because I haven't had that for so long. So it was so nice to get through, the first parts of the seasons. Oh wow, we won again. Oh wow, we won again. Oh, we're winning these really good teams like that are, high caliber teams. But with as high profile as Denver was, and just being, obviously they kind of had the horrible end to their season there, but as high profile as they were, when we came into Denver and we were looking good against Denver, like I was like, we ended up losing that game, but I thought we looked really good. And, just being able to see that our team can compete with those upper echelon teams, it just makes me so excited for this year, especially with, all the adjustments we've made. So.
Yeah, I have to say that obviously, I mean, the 9-0 start that was incredible. I think that Jamal Charles scoring the 4 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns in one game against the Raiders. I mean, obviously that was huge.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about a high point. It's been a long time since Chiefs fans have had something like that to really look forward to and really cheer about,
bask in a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. No, absolutely. Bask in it, I mean, but obviously making the playoffs was huge. Of course, I'll segue that into, what was your low point of the season? And it's probably the same as mine.
Man, I mean, for me, it just really came into, I guess, I mean, obviously the playoff performance was, definitely a low point, but for me, really, the big one was just the decline of the defense. Because I was on board and you were on board. I mean, me and you had really similar opinions where we were the ones talking like, wow, this defense is legendary. I mean, I wasn't about to go out like some people and compare them to the Bears like that, because I mean, you have to let that stuff play out. But the defense was so legendary and was doing so well. And when they started falling apart, I was watching games with my hands on my head, just going, what's going on? This is nothing like we've seen in the first half of the year. So.
Yeah, I gotta say it was that playoff game. The second half of that playoff game, and actually the last quarter and a half of that playoff game. I mean, Andrew Luck and leading that. I mean, just absolute epic, legendary comeback against the Chiefs, and there you go with your. I mean, the most monumental defensive collapse, damn near in NFL history. Blowing that. What was it? A 35-point lead, I think.
Yeah.
Just
trust me, I heard about it. My sister's a Colts fan, so
I got a guy in my fantasy football league that's a Colts fan. I said, "Are you going to be in the league again this year?" He goes, "Did the Colts beat the Chiefs in the playoffs?" You're an asshole.
Yeah, it was brutal.
Really.
But see, I was so worried.
And honestly, I mean, if I had to pick one. Yeah, I was going to say, if I had to pick one moment in that game that was the absolute lowest point, it would by far be when the Colts running back fumbled the ball and it bounced right back into Andrew Luck's hands and he scored a touchdown.
Yeah, that was just brutal.
Right then and there, right then and there, I knew there's nothing. When the football gods want you to lose, you're going to lose, and when they do that, it's over. I mean, there's just nothing you can do. So, yeah, I mean, what a high season, and to go out on such a note. I mean, it was, definitely it was definitely a roller coaster ride. That's for sure.
That whole second part of that game was kind of fuzzy because I was drinking by then. I was like
heavily.
I was like slowing down my DVR watching that ball bounce back into Andrew Luck's hands. I was like, football doesn't even do that. Like, that doesn't even make. I was calling physicists and being like, how does that even happen? Like,
it was I still wake up actually at night sometimes in cold sweat. And with that image of that ball bouncing. I hate you, Andrew Luck. My wife wakes up. What's wrong? We're going way down the rabbit hole here. So
you're asleep and you're just like scraggly beard,
neck beard, flip phone. I don't know what's going on. But this whole recap of the 2000 when we set the show up and did some show prep, we said let's recap the 13 season to kind of lead into our first actual main thing that you and I wanted to talk about, which was kind of as the 13 season came to a close, there was obviously some holes that needed to be filled on the Chiefs roster, and the John Dorsey, Andy Reid kind of philosophy is we're going to fill that roster not through free agency, and they didn't lie, they didn't do anything in free agency other than let players walk out the door, but they said we're going to fill this through the draft, and so I got the Chiefs draft picks pulled up here, so I kind of want to just go pick by pick and get your take, and let's kind of talk about and see what we think as far as these picks go. Obviously, the first pick, first round, Chiefs. Every major pundit from Bucky Brooks to every draft, expert, Matt Miller, all of them said Chiefs needed to draft a receiver in the first round, and this was the deepest receiver draft in 20 years. I don't know how many times I heard that. And the Chiefs choose a pass rushing defensive end that they've turned into a linebacker. Yeah. So,
and I was with it. I was like, here's my deal is I'm not a big college watcher, so I touch base a little bit with it. I follow it a little bit just because I know these are players going into the NFL. I have friends who are diehard college fans, so I touch base with them quite a bit. But, I do a bunch of studying come draft time because I don't know a lot of these guys. So I kind of look at who we're predicted to get or, our positions that I feel that are needed, and I kind of research those guys. And, I was the same way. I was looking at all the different wide receivers, seeing who might drop to us, and everyone was kind of playing with different things. And so, needless to say, I was very surprised. I think he's a good pick. Dee Ford looks great in all the tape that I've seen, and I think we have a way of developing some good pass rushers. So I'm excited for it. But I was definitely looking, okay, well, Kelvin Benjamin is there. I was like, he's kind of touted to be kind of that end zone guy and stuff like that. And then I was even thinking, an inkling of might they take Bridgewater just because of the Alex Smith contract debacles, but.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting taking a pass rusher there. Now, a lot of people have said, and they agree, they like the pick because they like Dee Ford, but they don't necessarily agree with why he was taken, which is rumored to be that he's going to be Tamba Hali's replacement when Tamba, either retire, moves on in a couple years. He's getting a little bit older and whatnot. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think Hali's got some gas left in the tank. I don't necessarily think that his outright replacement was drafted, but the thought of Dee Ford on the field with Tamba Hali, Justin Houston, Derek Johnson, Dontari Poe, and you can't double team all those guys. So, yeah. What's an offensive line to do with 5 solid pass rushers coming at their quarterback?
Well, especially, in Andy Reid, he's, I think, not only, I think he is just an important part of, how that defense is too. I think he's going to use those guys correctly and see if we can get that pass rush really going. So I am excited for that. But like I said, I was with you. I was looking wide receiver all the way, so I was kind of blinded by the pick a little bit, and I had to break out my research skills going, okay, D Ford, who is D Ford again?
Yeah, it was definitely a shock. So obviously that was the first round pick. Second round, Chiefs didn't have a pick. Well, they did. They picked a quarterback. His name is Alex Smith.
Yeah, best quarterback in the draft, man.
Yeah, best quarterback in the draft. We'll get to that in a minute. But moving into the third round, they took a guy out of Rice by the name of Philip Gaines, who's a cornerback. What'd you think about going defensive back here, cornerback?
Well, I think it was pretty apparent then, and they'd already talked about, there was rumors that they were trying to, trade Flowers, pre-draft even. So, I know we plan on talking about that a little bit later in this podcast, but, seeing them pick him there, and once again, he's the type of cornerback that fits what we're trying to do defensively. I think we're trying to mimic a little bit of that Seattle secondary. And, we have these kind of big, tall, physical, guys playing cornerback, and he really seems to fit that format.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This John Dorsey philosophy, it's very similar to what they're doing in Seattle. John Schneider, the general manager in Seattle, John Dorsey, both learned under the Wolf in Green Bay, and that was kind of the philosophy that he preached as far as those defensive backs, guys that are over 6 feet tall, that are right around that 200-pound range. And Philip Gaines is, definitely meets that, fits that mold. The funny story about that. Listeners, because you probably don't know, I'm in the Air Force. That's why I'm in San Antonio Station down here, and so I'm on base right after the draft. It's the week after the draft that I'm walking into they call it the base exchange. It's the department store on a military base, and I'm walking in the door, and I've got my Chiefs hat on and a Chiefs, I don't know, shirt or whatever, and this lady's walking out of the parking lot. And she sees me with my Chiefs gear on, and she goes, "Are you a Chiefs fan?" Now, I'm in San Antonio, Texas on an Air Force base. She says, "Are you a Chiefs fan?" I said, "Yeah." She goes, "You just drafted my son." I said, "We did?"
What?
And she said, "Yeah, in the third round." And I looked at her and I said, "You're Philip Gaines' mom?" And she goes, I think she was surprised that I knew exactly immediately who she was talking about. Apparently, young Mr. Gaines is a military brat. His father was in the Air Force, so they were stationed down here in San Antonio, and he went local high school right down the street. And talking to a guy that I work with, son, knows him, went to high school with him, and so by all accounts, I guess he's a pretty solid kid, and so hopefully. Big things are in store for young Mr. Gaines with the Chiefs organization. So
get him on the show, Seibel. What are you doing?
Well, you know what? What did I say? I got ins, right? I got ins. So it's a very good possibility once they take their 6-week hiatus here coming up before training camp starts, that we might be able to get our first Chiefs guest player on the show. So we're going to work on that for sure. But so yeah, third round. That's the third round selection. Moving into the fourth round, Chiefs take a young man out of Oregon. DeAnthony Thomas goes by the name of Black Mamba. Well,
oh yeah.
What did you think about this one, Doug?
Oh, and I'm a Northwest guy, so I know DeAnthony. I like I said, I don't follow a lot of college football, but I do follow Oregon. So, I kind of was excited. Very rarely watching the draft has it ever happened. I think one other time has it ever happened with me watching the draft where I'm like, come on, take him, come on, take him, come on, take him, and that's the name that's called. You don't get that very often, especially with the Chiefs because they do such weird stuff in the draft sometimes. But when they actually called his name, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I'm so excited just because he's a football player. He's tiny and he's small and he has all these little things going against him, but he's an athlete and he loves to go play, and he's definitely seems to be what we're going to be our Dexter McCluster replacement. just kind of that guy who can go out and kind of play these weird different formats and positions and create plays just for him to touch the ball, and obviously the special teams. So.
Yeah, and you said it, and so I'm gonna say it. I almost feel bad for the guy that he's kind of being referred to as McCluster 2.0. Because the Chiefs have had that since 2010 when McCluster was drafted. Obviously, McCluster departing in free agency to the Titans. Now everybody is immediately going to compare him to McCluster, fairly or unfairly. I mean, he's very similar stature, very similar size. I've watched a lot of tape, and I didn't know who he was. Now, the pick was applauded pretty much universally across Chiefs Kingdom, I think, when it happened. I didn't know who he was, so I YouTubed him and I checked out some of his tape. Yeah, no, I didn't know who he was. I really, honestly didn't. Being like you, being like you, not a huge college fan. So I watched. I've probably watched about an hour and a half, 2 hours of his stuff. Just kind of getting a feel for who he was, and oh damn, I'm excited to watch this kid in a Chiefs uniform.
Oh, me too.
There's several YouTube videos out there, listeners. So I highly recommend that if you haven't checked it out, you YouTube young Mr. Thomas, goes by the name of Black Mamba. Any guy that brings his nickname with him to the pros, and I mean Black Mamba, really, but whatever works, I guess. But I mean, there's a couple videos where it shows this kid, catching the ball in space, a very, very Chiefs-esque play under Andy Reid's offense now. Catches it with his hands away from his body, something that McCluster never really seemed to be able to do. Jukes a defender, and then you hear about breakaway speed, but literally in watching this video, you can see him running down the sideline with the defender chasing him, and him literally moving away from the defender, and just leaving that defender in the dust. And so obviously the level of competition in the NFL is much higher, and there's going to be a learning curve. Got it. But I'm excited. I mean,
that's the beautiful thing about someone like him, though, is he doesn't have to come in there and have these huge expectations on him. He's a fourth round pick in a team that already has everybody in place. They've got the running back. They don't need him to come in and be the running back. We've got the best running back in the league. So, they are going to be bringing him in and giving him 4 to 6 touches a game, where they're just designing plays specifically for him to, hey, see what you can do. You know what I'm saying? So, and then obviously the special teams. I mean, they're going to probably have some accountability for him returning the ball. But that's the beautiful thing, is he has that great hands. He has that ability to, anytime he touches the ball, can score.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm with you. I actually wrote a piece for Cover 32 /Chiefs. If listeners, if you want to check it out, and talking about the three-headed attack that the Chiefs backfield has. Obviously, like you said, Chiefs have hands down, and I don't care, LaShawn McCoy, you're full of it if you think that you're better than Jamal Charles, because it just ain't true. Chiefs have hands down the best running back in the league. All around, all-purpose back, whether it's running between the tackles, hitting the edge, or catching the ball. And then Knile Davis really making his, presence known, last season in that Week 17 game against the Chargers when Andy Reid sits his starters, and then in the playoff game against the Colts, which we didn't really talk about, another down moment, in that playoff game. Charles goes down with a concussion, 6 plays into the game or something like that.
Yeah.
And Knile Davis steps up and, does his thing, 2 touchdown scores in that game. So now you bring in Black Mamba, and that's what I'm going to call him, his Black Mamba, because I love it. But you bring him in, and you move him to that running back position or into the slot, or even push him out wide, and you're gonna have mismatches. You're gonna have mismatches because of his speed and his size. So. No, I mean, it's great. It's a great pick, and the value there in the 4th round, I think, is it is. It's phenomenal. It really is. So, all right, we beat young Mr. Thomas into the ground here. Moving into the 5th round, the Chiefs they took a quarterback. Surprised me a little, but not really, because it is Andy Reid. And I thought that it was going to be McCarron out of Alabama, but it was actually Aaron Murray out of Georgia. What'd you think of that pick?
Well, I did the same thing that you seem to be doing with Anthony Thomas, where, I was like, who? He wasn't, in the top chunk of quarterbacks that I'd really researched. So, um, I immediately went and started kind of browsing some tape, and I'm a little familiar with Georgia. They're a very heavily defensive team, so like I said, I like defense, and so I've been familiar with a lot of Georgia players and following them from defense, but not so much offense. But it was good to see that he set some SEC records before he got hurt, and excited to see him come in and see what he could do. I have a big buddy that's actually in Florida now, but he's from here too, who does college writing, and he's going to school for all that, wants to become an announcer and do a bunch of different college writing and stuff. And he said that he was like, this had nothing, he didn't send it to me, just in general he was putting out there that Aaron Murray was going to be this year's Russell Wilson. So I was kind of excited by that comparison, because he really knows what he's talking about when it comes to college prospects.
I'd heard the name, Murray's name. Obviously, his big story was his blown ACL, and that he would have been the number one pick last year in the draft had he, come out early, and chose not to finish college like so many of them do, come out early, but he chose to stay, blew his ACL, and so there was the long road back and all that. So that's kind of why I was familiar with him, coming into the draft, and then I kind of watch some tape on him. Funny enough, Dee Ford and him kind of have a little bit of a rivalry. Dee Ford planted him a couple of times in their game that they played against each other last year. So, but the picks kind of surprised me, and this is why. Alex Smith aside, Chase Daniel aside, I kind of got the feeling last year that the Chiefs and Andy Reid in particular were pretty content with their quarterback room, with having Tyler Bray as that number 3. That they picked up as an undrafted free agent last year. It surprised me a little bit that they went with Murray here. But, obviously competition is going to breed excellence, and the best guy is going to win. But, it did. It surprised me a little bit that they would take a guy at number 5, when you can still get some value out of other positions. They're not going to carry 4 quarterbacks on the roster. No team really does that. Mm-hmm. Any quarterback of that caliber that you put onto the practice squad is going to get snatched up by another team, so that you might as well cut them. So it really did surprise me a little bit that they took them, and we'll see. If you haven't gotten an opportunity, listeners, and Chris, you too, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you check out the episode of Gruden's Quarterback Camp with Aaron Murray. Very, very impressive young man, very smart. And was able to make all the throws that Gruden asked him to make. Gruden seemed to be pretty impressed with him, and that guy, I've watched several episodes with different quarterbacks, and he doesn't pull too many punches. If he doesn't like a guy, he's not afraid to say it.
Yeah, but once again, it might have come down to a value thing. The same with the Anthony Thomas, where they're like, okay, well, this guy in round 5 still being available, we know he has this ability, and you're just going to gamble a little bit on that injury, What else?
No, like I said, I don't hate the pick at all. It made me raise my eyebrows a little bit, because I thought, they were comfortable, but obviously, their level of comfort is, they're going to take, the value, and they're going to figure it out. So.
Well, then they're still not, like I said, they're still in kind of unclear waters with Alex Smith. So, you never know, what they're thinking. Hey, if we lose Alex Smith, we might need somebody who, can come in and get something done.
Yeah, no, it's you're very right, and we're going to talk about the Alex Smith. We're going to talk about the Alex Smith contract deal, here coming up in a little bit. But it's definitely something that weighs on the coaching staff's mind. So. Last 2 picks, Chiefs didn't have a 7th rounder. They had 2 6th rounders, and they took 2 linemen. They took a guard and a tackle, both obviously developmental prospect type players. But this guy out of Canada, and I don't know how much you've seen on him, Chris. He was delivering a baby. He went to medical school or something in Canada, and he was delivering a baby the day of the draft or something like that. but definitely he's raising some eyebrows. When it comes to his play and that offensive line is definitely, a position group that's in flux. For the Chiefs this year, obviously losing, a couple of starters on that front as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the other point. I think that's what they were doing here round 6 and why they traded up. They're like, let's just go after two guys who, may not be, our best options, but they have real high potential. Guys who we think can come in and, might just totally not work out for us. But if they do work out, they're going to be really kind of high caliber guys. And I think that's kind of what they were doing there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's exactly what they were doing is, they were hoping that they were going to find those diamonds in the rough. So, but I think overall, I mean, I don't know if you were going to put a letter grade on this draft, and it's tough because we haven't seen a snap yet or anything, but just based off of what you've seen and what what kind of letter grade would you give this draft?
I like it. Like I said, it wasn't exactly how I thought it was going to play out, but I think they did a great job. The big sealer for me really was getting DeAnthony Thomas there in round 4. I'm really high on him, so when they picked him up, I thought it really kind of upped their draft status for me. But I would say I'd probably give him a B. I think for what we had, the super late picks, the no round 2, we were kind of in a tough spot to begin with. So for what we had available to us, I think we pulled out some really good players that are going to immediately come in and have some changes for us.
Yeah, I'm actually right there with you. I was going to say probably a solid B, if not a B minus, only because I really would have liked to see him take a receiver.
It's going to be interesting. Especially
I hate to
in free agency.
Well, yeah.
I mean, who's going to catch balls? I mean, that's the trick.
Well, they got a ton of them on the roster, but it's the same ton that they had last year, really, and so it's like, I don't know. We'll see. So that's I'm going to say B minus, C plus B minus range just for that reason, but. That's again without a snap of football being played, so it's really tough to put any kind of a grade on it. But talking about roster turnover and as the world turns in the NFL, a lot of people forget that this is a business, and the NFL giveth and the NFL taketh away. And this last Friday, the NFL taketh away a player from the Chiefs, as he was released, and that's. Of course, I'm talking about Brandon Flowers, which it's no news at this point. I mean, he's gone. He's got between 7 and 10 teams interested in his services, depending on which source you look at. What were your thoughts? You texted me immediately, so I know that it was kind of a big deal. What were your thoughts on the Flowers?
Well, here's the thing,
release.
Is I'm one of those people where. As much as I know football, sometimes I too forget that it's a business. You know what I'm saying? Like, I get emotionally invested in players that I like, and Brandon Flowers has been one of them. He had some, downs this last season, and, like everybody said, he doesn't really fit into the scheme that they're really trying to do. But damn if he isn't a good corner. Damn if he isn't, a really productive guy who does well and likes to come out and play. And it's the same thing that comes along the line when we let go of Tony. It's hard for me because I these are players that I've invested in, and when you sit down and look at the money, I mean, yeah, he was dropping him. I don't know a number off the top of it. 15 million in 2 years or something that we were going to save from dropping him, and then we have suitable replacements. I think that will fit that format that we're going for, especially drafting Gaines. It's going to fit the format, I think, a little bit better for what we're trying to do. So that's rough.
Yeah, and like you, I mean, Flowers was a very, very loved player on this team. There's certain players where people didn't bat an eyelash when they left. A lot of in free agency, a lot of people were happy to see McCluster go and all of his drop balls and his his high injury rate and stuff like that. Flowers is kind of a different story. I mean, he's been injured. he played through injury. He's never kind of come off as one of those Rudy Poo, I'm hurt, I can't play kind of guys. I mean, it's from what I've seen, and obviously I'm a fan, just like you, Chris, and just like all you listeners, listen to the show. But you're right, he was a beloved player, but it is a business, and when there's a new scheme that comes in, those players that don't necessarily fit that scheme and that coaching and that front office regime, unfortunately they become casualties, and that's exactly what happened with Flowers. Now, I will say, not a single one of you should shed a tear over the man Brandon Flowers, because he's going to be very well paid wherever he goes this year. He's going to fit a scheme. He's going to fit another team's scheme well. I think he's still got a lot of years of play left in him.
He'll be picked up by the end of the week, I'm sure.
I'm sure that he's already fielding. I mean, he is fielding offers. I'm sure that he's probably at this point just considering a new contract, where he wants to go, and that sort of thing. But class act all the way. But he was 5'10" and well under 200 pounds, and just did not fit that. As we talked about, that 6 foot plus kind of mold that they want their.
In all the tape that he doesn't do press coverage well. I mean, that was kind of the big thing on him, is he was getting beat big time anytime they do press coverage. He just didn't have the physicality that they were looking for.
You're absolutely right. And they tried to kind of move him inside this last season and let him play the slot, and that, and then obviously there were rumblings, and we don't know. We're not in that locker room. We're not in those meeting rooms, but you hear the rumblings that he was not happy about being moved inside, that he looked at himself as an outside type of defensive back, and there's a lot that goes into it. But you hit the nail on the head. The big reason, and the big at the end of the day, what happens is the Chiefs saved about $15 million over 2 years, $7.5 million this year. Prior to the Flowers release, they had just a hair over $2 million in cap space, which really isn't enough to do anything in regards to contract extensions. Now they're sitting at over $10 million in cap space. What that does is that frees up a good chunk of money to start really working these contracts. And I'm talking obviously about Justin Houston and Alex Smith, the two major contracts that are hanging over the heads of the Chiefs right now. Chris, not sure if you followed everything today. I know that you're not on Twitter, which is where I get most of my news, but Houston's holding out at this point. Mandatory minicamp started, and he was no-show. So he will get fined for the next 3 days. Minicamp is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So he will be fined those 3 days if he doesn't show up. But at this point, he's holding out based on, I guess the assumption that he's going to get a new contract, and he's not going to practice until he does.
Well, they need to give him a new contract. I mean, out of anybody on the entire team, give that poor guy a contract. What, he's set to make $168,000? Like, are you kidding me? For a player of his caliber, like, and that's what he's made the last 3 years, is $168,000 a year. Like, and I could see that at the start, because I mean he wasn't like this high caliber player, but man, that guy's come in and performed, and he's really put it out there, and I mean, I don't know the numbers that they're probably coming at him with, if they've come at him with anything, but they need to at least give him something, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I actually just finished an article for Bleacher Report that'll post Wednesday morning. Chiefs fans, as you're listening to this, if it's later than Wednesday morning, then this out. But over at BleacherReport.com, discussing that very issue and kind of probably what the Houston contract potentially could look like. And in doing that, if you break down a couple of different contracts, and you look at some pass rushers, you kind of got Robert Mathis, who is the man when it comes to pass rushing from the Indianapolis Colts. In fact, he was the sack leader last year with 19.5 sacks at 33 years old. That's not too shabby. He's only set to make about $5 million this year. Of course, he's playing at the end of his career. but still playing at that high level. Kind of on the other end of the spectrum, you got Mario Williams from the Bills, who's got just an outrageous contract. It was a 6-year, $96 million deal, 50 guaranteed, that he signed a couple years ago with the Bills. I kind of think that Houston's is going to fall somewhere in the middle. They're probably closer to what Tamba Hali got, which is right around 50, 55 with about 30 guaranteed. So that's what I'm thinking now. If the Chiefs offer him up a contract similar to that, they will still have it, depending on how they structure it, obviously, and how the money falls. They'll still have about $7 million this year to work with for a Smith deal. So that's the next thing is, they're obviously working both of these contracts in tandem, trying to get them done. What do you think about giving Smith a contract this year? Or should we, obviously Smith is content to practice, is content to play out this year's contract. What do you think on that, Chris? Give him a contract this year or let him play it out?
It matters. It's hard to say because you don't know any of the kind of go-in-betweens with them, I think he's proved that he has the wherewithal to stay in there and make something happen. You know what I'm saying? And I think, you have discussed over and over that the Chiefs don't need this huge, high-end, flashy quarterback. We need someone who's consistent and doesn't turn the ball over. And that's what Alex Smith is. He's the game manager. He shows that when he needs to, he can put some high-caliber games together. So, I think we have to give him that room. If he is going to be unhappy with playing this last year out, he has a pretty decent contract. He's set to make
$8 million this year.
$8 million. So he's not playing for it's not like the Justin Houston situation where you're paying a guy pennies, in comparison to their position. So he's set for a good amount of money. I'd like to see them extend it. I would not like to see them put together this huge, crazy contract. Quarterbacks right now are just getting just these crazy contracts that I can't even fathom. And I'd really like to see him put together something a little bit smaller, a little bit more conservative, just to, to keep, show that we believe in him. But, we're not signing the guy up for some 6-year contract where we don't know, what the future is going to be like.
Well, right now, allegedly, what's on the table is that what he wants, or his agent wants, is 6 years, $126 million. You're looking at about $18 million a year. Is Alex Smith worth $18 million a year?
Man, it's rough. I think personally that's what I would hold off on that. I would try and go for something. I would try and put together a 4-year contract with him, something a little bit smaller. But I know that's just not the way things are going with quarterbacks right now. All these quarterbacks are expecting these huge, long-year contract. But I also feel for Alex Smith. The poor guy wants some stability. He's never had that in his career. Even when he's been in one place, he's always had different coaches and different regimes and different, things going on. So I think what he's looking for is a place where he can finally plant his feet and grow into that quarterback. And I'd love that to be the Chiefs.
I'd love it to be the Chiefs too. And obviously, fans that have followed us from our previous show on the other network, will know, and new fans, I'll just tell you outright, and Chris, you know this as well, there's probably not a bigger Alex Smith fan around than me. I love Alex Bob's jersey last year. I was his biggest supporter when everybody was saying, oh, he's nothing but a game manager and he can't throw the deep ball, and I was the guy saying, just wait. And, I think, the culmination of last season was that playoff game. All out. 378 yards with 5 touchdowns, no interceptions. Alex Smith is not the reason that the Chiefs lost that playoff game by any means. Now, that doesn't mean that he's worth $18 million a year at 30 years old. When you're talking about by the end of the match, the end of that contract, he's going to be 36. I don't know. I mean, to me, that makes that Murray draft pick look all that much smarter.
I know. Well, the thing is he's going in and he has everything on his side. He said, "Come on, I came in here, took this organization from zero to hero, and then on top of that, he's been able to throw these just crazy contracts in their face. You know, you're seeing stuff like Kaepernick's contract. You know, he was twice the quarterback Kaepernick has been, and you know Kaepernick's getting crazy money. You have someone like Joe Flacco, who I still can't believe the contract he got. I mean, the guy can throw the ball deep down the field, but he is nowhere near as far as an efficient of a quarterback as Alex Smith, in my opinion. He's a lot more hit or miss. He turns the ball over. Once he gets flustered, he can't play. And Alex Smith doesn't do all those things. And so he's able to take quarterbacks like that a lot of people probably feel aren't as good as him in a lot of different areas and say, look, this is what these guys are getting paid. Why am I not getting paid this?
Well, and that's exactly it, and that's the problem in the league right now. Is there is no middle tier quarterback market. You know, there is a market for your Aaron Rodgers, your Tony Romos, your unfortunately your Joe Flacco's,
Tony Romo's the other one. I still can't believe the contract they regave him.
Yeah,
and I like Tony Romo. I'm a guy that I don't like the Cowboys, but I like Tony Romo. I think he gets a bunch of criticism, and he does choke. He does do these things. But he's a great quarterback. He's a guy you can create a franchise around. And I like Tony Romo, and I still cannot believe the contract they gave him.
Yeah, he's up there. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers with the Packers, I think has earned every penny that he's making. As much as it pains me physically to say this, Peyton Manning, he's earned every.
Give Rodgers, give those guys as much money as they want, but you cannot tell me Flacco and Kaepernick are anywhere near the type of quarterback that they are. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
They're not, what I mean, and that's the thing is, but that's what I'm saying, and that's what a lot of folks have been saying is that there's not really a secondary quarterback market for guys like Alex Smith. Mm-hmm. And we can put Andy Dalton from the Bengals in that category. You can put a guy like Matt Schaub, who now plays for the Raiders, in that category. That they're not elite. They're whatever that is. They're not they're not Aaron Rodgers. They're not Peyton Manning. So where do we stick them? How much do we pay them? What kind of contract are we looking at? Do we just let them float off into free agency and see what they can get somewhere else as a backup, and then we'll draft somebody? Or
well, here's the deal, Jason. This is what
that's kind of where the NFL is.
It really boils down to the fact that
what's that?
I said it really boils down to the fact that all these teams, they don't want to be the Cleveland Browns. That's what it comes down. They don't want to. They know that the quarterback that they have is good enough to be in this kind of higher tier middle, market for quarterbacks, and they are so afraid of going into a spot where you're going 3, 4, 10 years without finding a quarterback that fits into your system that they're giving mediocre guys high-end money to keep their, quarterback.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I agree with you. And you look at Alex Smith's stats since 2010 when he really made his turnaround. I just pulled it up here real quick. He's only thrown 27 interceptions in the last 4 seasons. In the last 3 seasons, he's only thrown 17.
Yeah, that's incredible.
I mean, no, it really is incredible. The last 2 seasons, he's thrown 12. He threw 7 last year and 5 the year before that. I mean, granted, the year before, the 12 season was a short season for him when he got benched. But I just, like I said, I just can't see where he is. Even all that being said, $18 million is awfully steep. So. And especially since the Chiefs have another, contract kind of looming over their head in Rodney Hudson, their center, who is scheduled to hit free agency this year as well. So another thing to consider. But that'll be another conversation as pretty much out of time for this inaugural episode of Chiefs Central Radio here on Pro Football Central Network. Chris, kind of some final thoughts here before we wrap this one up for the night?
Yeah, well, as far as the last little talk on contracts, too, you got to think, that they also talking about looming over their head. Jamal Charles, he's going to be coming up, too. I mean, he's not due for this next year, but that's a big chunk of money that's going that direction because there's no way they're letting him go.
Yeah, he's got 2 years left on his deal. I just had a conversation with a guy on Twitter about this that said that the Chiefs needed to pay Jamal Charles before they paid anybody else. And while I agree that Charles deserves whatever the Chiefs are willing to pay him, unfortunately in that running back market, the running back a dime a dozen, and I love Jamal Charles, and I will stand firm by the fact that he's the back in the NFL. But, the Chiefs have two other really good running backs on their roster right now who I'm not saying could be Charles, but I'm not saying that they couldn't be either. Mm-hmm. He's going to make $4 million this year and $6 million next year. So that's about right for what he's doing. That's what Marshawn Lynch is making in Seattle. He's making $5 million this year.
Yeah.
So, but no, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's definitely going to be a contract situation that's looming, and I don't envy John Dorsey at all in that front office having to make these decisions of who gets paid what and balancing that checkbook. So
yeah, well, no, I'm excited. I'm excited just for the new year, trying to see what's happening. I'm excited to see the new. I mean, there's a lot of trades and new people on new teams and teams with whole new looks to their system, and it's going to be a big year for, I think, a lot of stuff switching out. We have a lot of the kind of old flags coming down a little bit and some new rejuvenated blood in a lot of places. So I'm just excited to see where we go and, take some of the power that we have last year and put it into a new year and see, what direction it takes us.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, Chris. I really think so. I mean, especially considering the Chiefs are coming back in the same system they were in last year, same offensive coordinator, same defensive coordinator, same head coach, same quarterback. A lot of the same faces coming back this year. Yes, they lost a chunk in free agency, some key players, especially linemen, and we'll talk about that stuff. Going through the next 6 weeks or so is really kind of the no man's land of it for an NFL fan because. After this week of the mini camp, the players are released until training camp, and so really there's going to be very little news going on. Obviously maybe some contract deals here and there, but never fear, Chris and I'll be here to come up with something to talk about. We'll figure something out, but definitely gonna be here. Listeners to bring you through that 6 weeks of hell that is the final break of the NFL offseason. So, coming up, next week, I think that we'll probably take a look at the Chiefs 2014 schedule, Chris, and break down those opponents and see, kind of what we think, and break down some positional battles on the roster, and I think, Chris, you and I can kind of wade through that mess and see, what we think about who some different starters may be on the roster, and we'll definitely try to get a guest or two in here to break up the monotony of just listening to me and Chris babble back and forth at each other. Chris, any final things to add for the listeners before we shut her down for the night?
No, I'm just excited to get back going again, and just hankering for football again, and trying to get that whole ball rolling. So any little tidbit I can get's good for me. I need something. I don't know what to do on Sundays.
Yeah, the Sundays are definitely pretty dull. My honey-do list. We just moved into a new. My honey-do list is on football need get here. All right. Well, I think that's about all we're going to hit on tonight. So for Chris Kilduff up in the beautiful Pacific Northwest in Spokane, Washington, I'm Jason Seibel in San Antonio, Texas. Letting you guys know we're here for you. Keep it red, keep it yellow, keep it Chiefs. You've been listening to the Chiefs Podcast, Chiefs Central Radio on the Pro Football Central Radio Network.